The next book I'm going to discuss on the topic of the family in the Western world is Christopher Lasch's Haven in a Heartless World, The Family Besieged. Now, Christopher Lasch was an interesting American historian of the second half of the 20th century, and he was notable for, in some ways, being quite leftist. So he would talk about capitalism, he would criticise capitalism, he would draw on post-Marxist thinkers like the Frankfurt School, Adorno, and so on. But he could also sound quite conservative, as in this book, where he would defend the institution of the nuclear family as we know it, as being essential to a society's health. So he combines a number of things, which, well, as he says himself in the introduction to this book, that people of various political persuasions might be confused in the way that he does this, and might need to get their head round what he was about. Ultimately, he wasn't a Marxist. He didn't believe in the communist revolution. I mean, his last book, his sort of magnum opus, The True and Only Heaven, was a critique of the idea of some kind of collective utopia, a defense of what you might call local communitarian perspectives from the lower middle class. So he's an interesting figure, and for me, this book really fills in some of the blanks that I have discussed were in Carl C. Zimmerman's Family and Civilization. If you've watched that video, you'll remember that I felt that while Zimmerman put his finger on certain dynamics of the changing nature of the family throughout history, in a useful way, he was severely hampered by his idealism, by almost entirely ignoring the economic basis to these changes. And Lasch's strength in this book is that he really majors on the way the Industrial Revolution changed the nature of the family. So he would posit that before the Industrial Revolution, much work was done within a household, that it wasn't only a woman's work that would be in or around the home, it would also be a man's work that would be in and around the home, and that children were raised as part of this way of life, as part of this community. But as a result of the Industrial Revolution, where a man's work was transferred outside the home, into the factory space, for example, and ultimately a woman's work as well, and children's, what he would say is that the functions of the family were transferred to professionals outside the home. It was the doctor, the teacher, and so on, who suddenly gained a huge amount of input over the members of the family and their formation. And for Lasch, this weakened the family's purpose and structure to the point that it's very hard to say what positive effects the family even has now, such as the denuded nature of parental effectiveness. And the title is interesting because it sort of sounds like a idealistic, sort of nostalgic longing for the family to be this haven in a heartless world. But what he's referring to is the bourgeois family of the 19th century, that wherein obviously it was the man who went out to do his work, to run his factory, so to speak, while the women and children really had very little useful work to do at all. They could sit around sewing, learning the piano. In the case of the boys, ultimately going to a boarding school and so on. because it was the servants who'd be doing much of the housework and so on in the house. And for Lasch, um, this was always a very tenuous situation. The domestic sphere provided a kind of haven for the world-weary capitalist to return to feel nourished emotionally, to rest from the dog-eat-dog world of capitalist competition outside. But it was a sort of sphere or bubble that could ultimately only be broken, that even among the middle classes, women could ultimately be drawn out into work outside the home. Children could ultimately be drawn into public schools or private education and so on, and the family could be weakened even there. So Lasch is not nostalgic exactly for the bourgeois family as much as he admires it in certain ways. What he's stressing is that simply preaching new ideas, as Zimmerman extolled the virtues of, will not change things. The economic situation of a society will ultimately have to change. If anything, will become better for families. And I think he's quite accurate in this. And for that reason alone, at least the first and last chapters of this book are well worth a read. Because as much as those ideas are great, the chapters in the middle go into some detail in the sociology of the family, of figures like Talcott Parsons and various others, which is interesting if you're interested in sociology, but certainly wouldn't be for everyone. Combined with which Lasch also goes into Freudian theory a fair degree, which he seems to agree to or subscribe to, which again your mileage may very much vary on how useful or pertinent you find that. But overall, I would say that Lasch provides an important corrective to what you might call moralizing analyses of the family's decline in the West, and food for thought as to where we go from here.